Republicans are happy to do that. The Republicans, their grassroots are happy to go tell their members, hey, we're not happy with the way what you're doing, right? But on our side,
we're too quiet.
We're a little bit quiet, especially when our members are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, when our members are not meeting expectations.
So big picture, from the beginning of the caucus, or I'm sorry, the session, one of the things we saw, and we had members of staff up there, is that as a very practical matter, there was not going to be any chairs, no Democrats doing anything. With the help of the folks in the caucus, you did something to deal with that. Tell us about that and why that was important.
So at the beginning, the question of whether or not there would be Democratic chairs was still up for debate. We were not 100% sure that it was going to happen. We were trying to work for an outcome where there would be Democratic chairs. Once things started rolling along, we were trying to figure out what their position was. And look, the choice was either we would have a few Democratic chairs of committees that are pretty much meaningless, right? We'll have ag and a few other committees that don't get a lot of bills, right? Or the other alternative that was proposed was that, okay, what if there are no Democratic chairs, but there are Democratic vice chairs, right? And we sort of balanced that out and said, like, look, we either have like 3 or 4 chairs of committees that are worthless, or we have vice chairs in every committee that exists.
With additional authority and abilities that they never had.
That we haven't now. The gamble was, we have never done the vice chair thing before, and we're taking a gamble on how it will work. We know what having a few powerless chairs does for us.
That sounds painful.
Yeah. So we didn't know what having a bunch of vice chairs would do. So we took a gamble. I think in the whole we came out ahead, because again, comparing a few relatively low powered chairs compared to vice chairs across the board, I think we were able to do more with the vice chairs.
Okay, and I got to apologize for something from the get-go. Our host, Brenda, Vice Chair of the Communications Works America, thank you for having us. Thank you for letting us use the facility. And thank you for the hardworking members of CWA, of which my mother was one, I think at least a long time ago, when she was a telephone operator back in the day.
Yeah.
For doing this. And one of the things that was interesting was there was an attempt to knock off checkoff for union dues, which you and your team were able to kill. Tell us about that.
That's something that, look, they try every session. Fighting labor is probably one of the top priorities.
Well, I think number one is trial lawyers. Number two,
yeah, fair. Okay,
labor.
Trial lawyers, and a close second is labor. They're trying to look. They're not stupid. They're going after the sources of Democratic power, sources of Democratic support, where the money comes from, where the volunteers come from. They're trying to cut that off. Right, trial lawyers, obviously, it's where the money comes from. It's a significant portion of funding for Democrats across the board. Labor is both money and support, right? And that's why, I think, as a point to make, as a Democratic chair, I have made it a point to say, like, we are going to double down on working on labor issues. We're going to double down on protecting us against anti-labor laws, right? Those things are important. That's why we spent also so much time fighting SB 30, which would have devastated the trial lawyers, right?
Well, their clients,
right? Oh, their clients, but no, I mean the intent, their intent about it is clear. The intent is, the intent is to hurt the industry by hurting the clients, right?
So it's to kill the hostage is the way we like to talk about it. So how, I mean, what was it? Because I saw one of the things we saw from, for example, some of the public justice, civil justice, was you had a ongoing war between the Paxton and the Texans for Lawsuit Reform, who were kind of traditional folks. And that seemed to play out very well. Is that kind of what you saw going on, or something different?
The Republican Civil War is still in full swing. Nothing has been settled.
Who wears the gray?
I'm sorry?
Who wears the gray in that Civil War? That's a trick question. You don't have to answer.
I mean, look, you have you have the ultra crazies, and then you have the mainstream Republicans who are happy to vote along with the ultra crazies. So
Is that it, or is there some middle crazies?
it's hard to say. So, like this is like it's like trying to figure out what's in a dark room. You can only know by the sounds they make, right? But when they don't make any sounds, how would you know that there's a middle? When the middle never pops its head up and say, "Hey, we're here, we're middle, and we'll vote middle." What's the difference between far right and completely being like believing the far right and just voting completely far right? What's the difference?
Hard to tell.
I don't think there's a functional difference. Like you can, people can tell, like members always tell me, like, "Hey, I'm not one of the crazies, I'm an extremist," but I was like, "But you take the same votes. What's the difference? You tell me that you know better, but your actions say that you don't know."
So what's the best explanation you've gotten for, I know I did it, but I didn't really want to? I know I want it. I think vouchers will suck for my district. I think it'll hurt the schools in my district. No, they've never owned up to that.
All those Republicans who was willing to go against Abbott, was willing to deal with that kind of abuse, that kind of attack, if they voted against vouchers the first time, right? And they did it anyways, right? You spent all that time, all that effort fighting that one position and fighting to protect your community. All of a sudden, you come back and it's changed, right?
So what's the best explanation you got? I'm not saying the real reason, but what's the best excuse you heard?
We had no choice.
They had their kid back tied up somewhere, or what? No choice except what?
What does it matter? What they think? They believe that they did not have any choice. They believe that their free will was gone. They believe that whatever they had that was in danger was in danger. Whether they believed it was school finance, school funding, whether they believed it's some other bill, whether they believed it's some funding for their home districts, whether they believe it's like Donald Trump will personally come after me in my primary. They're afraid of something. What that something is not important. But they have put it into their own minds that their fear about that something is greater than their need to protect their communities, right? And that's the only answer you need. You don't need to know what that something was, but whatever fear that was in my mind, that popped into their mind, was greater than their desire to protect their home communities, because they were willing to go to the mat last time and protect their communities. That's how important it was. That's how devastating this would be. But this time they weren't.
And
political cowardice. Only 2 Republicans stood firm. Right? 2 Republicans stood firm, Dave Phelan and Gary Van Dever.
Well, Dave Phelan, they did everything they could to kill him. So It's kind of like
Dave Phelan, basically lost his speakership over this, and he's not going to. And he says, "Screw this! I'm not gonna bend." And now that I've come this far, I've not fought this much to bend the knee now. Van Dever is the same way. Van Dever says, it was wrong then, it's wrong now. Come after me. I don't care. Right? The last 2 people who have some amount of courage left. And you saw this over and over again. I mean, like on the TXC vote.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Did anybody realize how this $4.5 billion industry was such a threat to Texas before Dan Patrick did?
No, nobody cared. Nobody cared. Right? Do you know how many members on that floor including myself? Right? I'm not shy about it. I talk about it all the time. Right? Because when this is wait. I'm gonna.
So are you gonna have to stockpile before September 1st, or what's gonna happen?
Okay. I'm gonna pause here. One of the things that we need to do differently, one of the things that will change things, is for all of us, everyone who uses, right, to normalize our usage. Nobody goes and says, "I have to justify my usage of beer." Nobody has to say like, "Hey, I need to give you a really good reason why I drink whiskey at night," right? Nobody does that, because you just said, "Hey, you're a grown-ass adult in America. You get to make your own decisions, and you get to decide what you want to do at night." right? When you're at home and trying to relax, nobody says, you have to make an excuse saying like you're going to drink wine or beer or have whiskey or have a smoke or smoke a hookah, whatever it is. Nobody makes you justify it. Why are we having to justify it for THC, right? We should stop talking about it like it's some shameful thing that we do. It is a thing that a grown-ass adult with full legal rights has chosen to do. That is our right as an American. The end, case closed, no more discussion, right?
Yeah. So where were the lobbyists on that? Because that kind of seemed like they were missing in action for that big an industry.
No, they were not. I promise you, if anything, this was not under lobbied. In fact, this was so over lobbied, it was not even funny. Like this was essentially the beer and wine and liquor industry going to war. They have seen what their sales have looked like in the past 5 years. They have watched their sales plummet, right? Because when people have, I mean, think about this. Like most people would take let's say if you're a frequent user, like a 25 milligram D8 or D9 piece, right? That piece is roughly between what brand you buy, like about $1 to $2 maximum for that piece, right? That's good for you for the whole night.
Really?
$2.
All right. Learn something every day. So
Mike, you and I need to hang out.
Yeah, more, probably, at least. So as a practical matter, do you think the governor's going to sign it or veto it?
I mean, as a political matter, I hope he signs it. I mean, it's terrible for Texans, but Democrats will campaign on that day and night. I mean, hell, we're going
to get a new logo. It's going to be marijuana
campaign around it, because you know what? If you watch the reactions on the right, holy crap! And we told you how pissed people would be, and it's the people on the right, like people who hate me. Like literally people who hate my guts and would not piss on me if I was on fire, right? They're like, hey, I hate Gene Wu, but I agree with him. This is dumb. This is real dumb. We did not vote for this. We did not send you to Austin to do this, right? And what's even worse, is many of those members told people when they called in point blank, I will never vote for a ban. Wow. And they voted for a ban.
Wow. Well, you know, it's one of those things. I have a lot of clients who are veterans. PTSD is a reality. It seems like a lot of folks came up and testified, but did that seem to be something where they didn't really care about that aspect that much?
Well, and this is what.
Well, actually, let me stop you. Why do you think it carried the House as opposed to whatever Dan Patrick wants of the Senate? Go ahead. It's being recorded.
I'm going to say this as nicely as possible. The Senate is a rubber stamp.
Yes.
And I'll leave it at that.
Yes, we all got that.
The Democrats in the Senate are like almost super minority. Mm-hmm. It almost doesn't matter whether they show up to work or not. And I understand a lot of times they don't want to fight this stuff. Whatever it is, the deliberative House is very clearly in the House now. It is no longer the Senate.
I think the nice way to say it is
the deliberative chamber is the House.
The Senate is Dan Patrick's bitch at this point.
Right. Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay. So
don't tell the senators.
Why did it pass? Well, actually, they did a great thing last week.
Why did it pass the House?
Yeah. Why did it pass the House?
Because of Dan Patrick. Dan Patrick, if you basically at the end of the session during that vote, basically had his lieutenants call through everybody, call through Democrats, call through Republicans. You wonder why there's so many Democrats who voted for it. They traded the votes, right? And basically said like, hey, you got some nice bills over here in the Senate. It'd be a real shame if something happened to them, right? And people got the message. So,
well, the crazy thing is this doesn't make it illegal to have
something they should not have voted for.
Well, if this doesn't make it something that you can't possess, it just means they can't sell it going forward.
The version that the Senate put through that we added in it is recriminalizing, and it is actually criminalized at a higher rate than currently marijuana. You would actually be better off having marijuana.
Well, that's another fact. Before
the
September
penalty
1st,
groups would be lower.
Yeah. So best accomplishment, because and we're going to open it up to questions in a few minutes, but
best accomplishment was killing as much crazy shit as we could kill.
Got it. What was the craziest thing you're most proud? I'm glad we feel that.
Criminalizing, like make it a crime for trans people to exist, like an actual criminal penalty. Calling it gender fraud.
That was a bill. I missed that
Yep.
one. Okay.
That if you portray yourself as one when they say you're something else, you're perpetrating a criminal fraud on people.
Wow. Wow. I have not seen that one. That one
Yeah,
kind of
killed that.
All right, give us another one that
I personally killed the anti-homeless bill. The second round of the anti-homeless bill. They couch it as anti-camping, but really it's just freaking monstrous. Basically, it would find ways to punish cities that had programs to help the homeless,
including one in Harris County.
Yeah, one in Harris
Which has
County.
reduced
And also,
homelessness
literally,
by
the more we
25%.
try to do to drive down homelessness, the more that it would punish you.
Yeah, that's terrible. Well, there was a bill that passed that I know is close to home. And by the way, I have a book for you called A Stranger in a Strange Land
Yeah.
about the fact. Have you read it already?
I'm very familiar, Stranger in a Strange Land.
All right.
It's a great book.
All right. Well, I was going to give it to you, so I won't.
I was still...
But here's what it's about. And I was out of town and I saw it. It's basically talks about how the Chinese Americans were the original undocumented, the target for every venom from 1800s on, and they're kind of the prototype for what we're seeing now in our nation. And there was a bill passed that makes it very, very difficult if you're a Chinese American or a Persian American to actually own property. Tell us about that.
So,
to actually own a home.
We've been fighting this legislation for 3 years now, and it finally passed. We were able to stop it the first time. We were not able to stop it this time. And this is a law that is coming back. The bill is called SB 17, and we often refer to as the Alien Land Law. And the reason we call it the Alien Land Law is because that's what they called it 100 years ago. 100 years ago, actually, 1891 is when they passed it the first time in Texas. This followed a spate of laws around the country that basically banned Chinese and Japanese people from owning property in the state. First passed in California and then spread throughout all Western states, and then also Southern states. And it banned Chinese people and Japanese people from owning property, period. No homes, no farmland, no businesses. That law in Texas was not repealed until after 1965, right? Until after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So fast forward to now, the state has now passed the exact same law. This time specifically, instead of mainly targeting the Japanese, this time it targets the Chinese with the exact same provisions. You cannot buy property, you can't buy a home, you can't buy business property, you can't own farmland, you can't even own water interest, you can't own mineral interest, you can't own timber interest. And your ability to invest in real estate or invest in a business that has real estate holdings is now limited as well. Essentially, the long way to look at this is
bring back the 1890s.
Just bring back the 1890s, but the message from now and the 1890s is exactly the same. The message is get out. We don't want your kind here. And the way I explain this to people in my community is this. Don't forget that the Chinese Exclusion Act didn't just limit the exclusion of Chinese people. It limited all Asian people. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 lasted from 1882 to 1965. Okay, so up until the 70s and the 80s, there was no real immigration. So under the Chinese Exclusion Act, only 105 Asians were allowed into the country per year. Per year, 105. Right? So between 1882 to 1965, there were no immigrants coming in.
Do you think many of our South Asian, Pakistani, Vietnamese
were not
community,
allowed,
do you think they understand that?
No. So here's the problem. In the 80s, you might have had a couple of valedictorians around, and it's a neat, we're like Asian community, we're kind of a circus act, kind of a novelty. Roll into the 90s, a lot more immigrants coming, more kids making it to the top. You roll into the 2000s. A couple years ago, I dealt with Bel Air High School. They had a situation where they've had to figure out who was the top valedictorian, because they had 18 co-valedictorians. Of their 18 co-valedictorians, 16 were Asian. Right? The problem
so why would you want to get involved in that?
The problem is, for my community, the problem is when the top 40% of Harvard is Indian and Chinese, we're not pushing out Black people. We're not pushing out Latino students, right? We're pushing out old, established money, power, and white, right? And not just
a lot of guys named Chip.
No, yeah. And the thing is, we're not pushing out the best and the brightest, because the best and the brightest still compete. We're pushing out the people who otherwise could not compete. The only reason that they're able to stay at that level is because of money
Legacy.
and power,
Legacy.
old money and power.
Right.
But what happens when that old money and power is threatened? Money and power fights back, right? And the thing is, our community doesn't understand that. And I think overall, what we've seen in America across the board, what's happening like in our society, like with student loans and everything, it's the same thing. We're fighting the same thing. We're fighting the same group of people. That old money and power is watching everybody come up and fight and knock them out of their positions. And they don't like that. And so they want to cut off that ability. They want to cut off that ladder. They want to chop off the ladder so you can't keep climbing up into their space. Right? And what does that look like? We're gonna deregulate college tuition, so we're gonna make it more expensive to get into college. We're gonna deregulate a hospital system, so you have to spend.
Can it really get more expensive?
Yeah,
No, of course it can.
It's happening right now. You watch it.
Yeah.
You're watching it right now.
Yeah. Well, I got 4 kids, so I know a little bit about it. So here's a question for you. Looking forward, I mean, do you see that? I mean, they've got folks that are in the marijuana industry that rely on marijuana for PTSD or just because. They've got the Asian American community hopefully paying attention. How do you see that playing out?
And that's the thing. And that's what makes me like both depressed and hopeful at the same time. And hear me out. Every one of these fights that we've had across the board, whether it's about anti-LGBT, right? There is a community there that is oppressed. There's a community there who feels the boot on their neck. And we go to anti-Asian stuff, and there is a community there that is oppressed, and they have a boot on their neck now, right? And we go down the line, whether it's like them going after anti-DEI stuff, and that hurts the Black community, whether they're doing anti-immigrant stuff that is targeted to Latinos, right? Every single one of those places, there is a community there. And those communities, sometimes we have some overlap, but sometimes we don't have a lot of overlap. But there's one commonality for all the communities.
They're getting screwed by the billionaires.
On your neck.
Yeah.
And the question is, when will all these communities turn around to see whose boot it is?
Or look up.
Or look up. I just need everyone to turn around and look. Because I bet you when we look, we realize it's all the same people, right? It's all the same boot. And what I'm frustrated about is that so far we've all fought these fights, these battles in our own little silos, and we scream about, we feel alone, we feel like no one's helping us, right? And it's just endlessly frustrating because I have jumped from each of these communities one by one. I've gone from community to community and fought their fights with them. And during those fights, I feel their frustration. It's like, hey, we wish more people would join us. We wish more people would help us, right? And down the line, one by one, each of these communities say the same thing. What makes me hopeful is that we can do that. It is not impossible for all of us. This is what I tell the Asian community. I have told them that when I talk to other communities in moments of quiet reflection, they will come to me and say, hey, Gene, we're going to come help you. But it is noted and not appreciated that when we have problems, the Asian community doesn't show up. That's real talk. That's for real, right? We should know that and respect that and understand that. But at the same time, like when we have Black issues, we should expect Asian and Latino and everyone else to be there as well. When we have Latino issues, we should have everybody fighting there as well. And that's what I think that's what leadership with Democrats should be, is that Democrats should go forth and saying, we are what unites all of these groups in their struggles, because we see it from everyone.
How about, since we're in a union hall, solidarity, and more important, united we stand, divided we fall.
Hell yeah.
And we are, it's everybody who's looking out for everybody that makes this country great, and that's what Democrats stand for. So thank you for that. With that, let me open up for some questions. Go ahead, sir, fire away.
I have a dual disability, physical and mental. Now, my favorite commissioner, has been a commissioner on the board of directors, board of commissioners.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. Go ahead. I'll come over.
Is Leslie Briones, the chief autograph on the meeting. Leslie Briones. And then what I want to say is I have a job at NRG Park. Now, Harris County workers get paid $20 an hour. Now, contract workers of Harris County get paid $21.65 an hour. Yet I only make $13.50 an hour. Is that because I'm a subcontractor of a contractor of the Harris County Sports Corporation?
Yeah, I'll jump on that. Thank you, sir. By the way, thank you for doing that. Thank you. I like the autograph shirt. That's pretty cool. So the question for those of y'all that didn't hear it is, what he's pointing out is what I think is a big problem is the privatization of government, where you have these agencies and these contractors that are getting away with paying people a lot less than they should. Am I saying that right? Where other folks who are doing the same job or close enough, who are government workers, maybe paid a little bit more, but not necessarily enough. And one of the things that our local party, HCDP, was pushing for unsuccessfully, but one of our 4 topics was minimum wage. Why do you think that's so difficult to get even a hearing?
Because the politics aren't there. When the people demand that we have a discussion of minimum wage, I think like we've been so beaten down about this stuff that like I think people have stopped asking for it. Like, we need to revise it. I think one of the things for Democrats is we need to go back and say we need to have a populist economic message. What is one of the #1 things for a populist economic message? The minimum wage.
And we got another. We had 4 of them. The second one was Medicare for all, basically health insurance. In getting some traction on that, why do you think we couldn't get that into a hearing?
Because the powers that be, the politics of it. I really want us to talk about this in a larger picture, right? That what has happened to our country over the last 50 years is the systematic dismantling of everything that makes us the middle class, right? Everything that helps us get to the road to the middle class, a strong public education system, a strong healthcare system, a strong infrastructure system, but not just that, good government jobs. This is a problem because our desire for things like Doge has been generated over the decades, right? We're constantly told the government is inefficient and we need to cut, we need to slash. But when they actually go and look, what do they find? They find nothing to slash because the government's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, Medicare costs about 2%, and you don't have $100 million a year CEO for an insurance company.
But
for example,
but this is a bigger problem than just that cost. Part of what helped us become successful is having a large number of well-paying government jobs, right? Because you think about this, there's how many like out there How many just very average education, average intellect, average effort per people do you think are out there?
Well, I would say there's an average.
Yeah. So like a good bulk of people, right? And you say like, well, these are not necessarily people who are going to have the wherewithal. They're not going to have they're not going to go fight to be in medical school. They're not going to grind their way through law school. But what do you want them to do? Especially as AI keeps taking all the jobs. We knew what to do back when America was powerful. We had lots and lots of local government jobs, like jobs where you can work just 40 hours a week.
How about a librarian?
Yeah, no, a librarian, somebody like a big crew that picks up the trash, people who work on cleaning the parks, people who plans things, people who like just go and clean up the esplanades along the freeway, like things that get done, things that for jobs for people who say like, look, I don't want to go to Harvard. I don't want to grind myself to death. I want a decent job that has decent benefits, that I don't have to worry about whether I can pay the bills, that if my kid breaks an arm, that we can just go to the hospital and get it taken care of, and that I don't have to worry about filing bankruptcy, that I can save enough that I can go on a decent vacation, like maybe Disney once a year, something silly, something fun, nothing outrageous.
That's called a union economy. You know that. Thank you.
But that's it. But we should have, instead of saying we should like look at government to slash all these jobs, we should say no, especially while AI is taking all of this, all of our future jobs, all the good jobs. Government should come in. All that money you're making for AI, tax them, put those money into the government, and then have government have a bunch of jobs for average slobs like who just want to get by.
I'm going to take a guess. You don't think we need more billionaires?
We don't need more billionaires. We need to take the money that would have made more billionaires and make more thousandaires, to make more 100,000-aires, to have people who can just buy a home and raise kids and have a decent life.
Well, how about if you're a working person, you ought to be able to have your family go to school and take
Yeah.
care of it. So other questions, by the way? I know we have folks. Yes, sir. Brandon, share. Go ahead. Yeah, just yell it out. I'll repeat it.
One, thank you for the work you did this
Yeah.
session. Right. I asked you to kind of look a little bit at the crystal ball. With the House rules from this last session, do you think that's going to be the new norm? Do you think that this new group on the right is kind of more emboldened to come back? And I guess the kind of a part two, some of our elder statesmen in the House, on the Democratic side, what's that appetite look to fight back against this new wave of arguably crazy?
So let me go ahead and repeat the question. First off, that's Brandon Brashear, our public probate administrator, Harris County. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
As I was explaining to folks, it's a new position created by our Democratic supermajority that basically takes care of families who they don't have a will and nobody to take care of somebody. That's what he and his office does. So thank you for doing that incredibly important work. But his question is, the supermajority. Go ahead, repeat it.
So the question is, actually,
well, the gist of it is,
so
under the rules,
it was two separate questions. I'm sorry, just
Brandon, go ahead.
Okay, so one with the House rules for this.
Okay, right. So will we have the same House rules again this next time? I don't know, maybe. This was a test of how this is a brand new first time that we were running it under these House rules. How do people like it? Will they change it? I think it'll depend on what the numbers look like next time. Look, if Democrats go and lose even more seats next time, I promise you they will change the rules
and make it better,
make it worse.
Oh, well, okay.
Right.
Trick question.
If Democrats come back and the numbers are really tight, we're probably going to ask them to, hey, you probably, as a part of the deal of getting our support, you need to make the rules more in our favor, right? We can have that discussion. We will have that discussion. The second question is, how do we keep the crazies from dominating again next time? That's up to us, right? Here's the easy answer. When were Republicans the most well-behaved? 2019. Why? Because they got their asses kicked in 2018, right? And completely up and down the street, they lost 12 seats that they weren't even supposed to lose. And they came back and there were just the best little boys and girls that you can imagine. And How do we encourage that kind of behavior again?
Be ready at the polls.
Massive ass kicking. The bigger the political rebuke to their bad behavior, the better they will behave next time, right? So they're not stupid, right? Most of them are not. So they understand, like, we kept telling them, hey guys, you guys keep doing this crap, you're gonna eat it next election cycle. And they're like, yeah, I know, but what do we, I don't know what we can do. I'm like, all right, you're gonna find out. So look, they effed around, they have to find out. If they don't find out, then it will get worse, because they have said, basically we have said, do whatever the hell you want. There are no consequences, then they're going to do whatever the hell they want.
So, yes, sir, go ahead. Go ahead. And then we'll, yeah.
Senator Blue, thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for
Sure.
tough session. Following up on your comment, or ask kicking, all for it.
Yep.
2024 election was a little tough, but
It was beyond a little tough.
immigration. So how do we get those people that did not come out?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat it just to make sure it's heard on the webcast. And obviously this is a big picture. This is our job as Democrats, not just the folks working. And by the way, thank you, staff. Right? Hey, thank you for making this happen every day. And we had 4, but we have 3, but hopefully we'll have 4 again soon. So thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Baird, for doing what you do. But the question is, how do we fix this? And I'll go ahead and insert something to that question. How do we get folks who didn't show up? We have this thing I like to call the G word, gerrymandering, where a lot of our folks and most of their folks, they know they wake up the next day, they're going to get elected in the general election.
Yep.
And not everybody does all they can to get out all our voters across the county. Yep. And we're 290,000 voters from statewide dominance because of Harris County, just Harris County. So as the chair of the caucus, are you going to fix that problem?
I can't promise anything, but I'm sure as hell try. And so this is what it is going to look like. Number one, the biggest complaint from voters is that Democrats don't serve a purpose. Like, why? There's no reason for us to exist, because they don't know what we fight for. They don't know what we care about, and what they have been told by other people what we fight for and what we care about, they don't like, right? So they feel Democrats are no longer the party of the working class. Democrats are no longer the party of the middle class. And that's what I want us to go back to, right? We can defend minority communities. We can defend the oppressed, but we can make the main focus of what we do about protecting the American dream, protecting the American middle class.
Freedom,
right?
This thing that
protecting freedom.
Protecting freedom. So here's the question. What, after this legislature, and it's not just on you because you got a big caucus, what are the things that we can point to as Democrats that said, this is what we stood up for, this is what we fought for, and this matters, and it ought to matter to you coming next November 2026?
Yeah, and look, from the legislature, it's hard because, again, we don't get to drive the narrative of what is done. We can only defend against what they do. So what do Democrats try to do? Democrats spent our time fighting against the Republicans' worst inclinations when they spent all their times fighting about, spending our time focusing on banning books, banning librarians, dealing with trans kids and all that stuff. We said, hey, what about public education? What about vouchers? What about all this other stuff? What about the stuff that actually matters? What happens with hospitals that are closing? Are you going to actually fix the grid? What are you going to do about water? Right? And try to keep them focused on those things. At the end of the day, what I really want Democrats to do is just be pissed. Okay? Be pissed about, not just about all the bullshit that they're doing, but talk about the stuff that's not happening. Where are the investments in education? Where are the investments in the healthcare system? Where are the investments? Where are the good government jobs? Where happened to all those good government jobs? What happened to well-paying teachers? What happened to all this stuff? The question that I want us to
What happened to my marijuana?
ask,
what happened to my marijuana?
Oh,
yeah.
What happened to Americans What happened to the American dream? What happened to the idea that we are the people, we are the greatest people on this planet? We should have the best lives. We should have the best education. We should have the best healthcare system. We should have the best roads, the best trains, the best planes. We should have the best of everything instead of having a laughing stock as a system, having not only like we have like Latin American countries laughing at Texas for not having a proper power grid. Like South American countries that barely have functioning governments are laughing at us, right? What happened to the America where you say like, look, I work hard and I should get a lot for working hard. What happened to the America where you actually get what you work for? That's what we should be talking about. That's what we should be enraged about. We should join MAGA. We should join all those MAGA idiots who say, like, I'm mad as hell at trans kids because I've not gotten a raise in 10 years. I'm mad at women for having rights because like no matter how hard I work, I'm just days away from bankruptcy, right? And then we should join them and tell them, that is completely fucked, right? But I promise you, it's not trans kids. I promise you, it's not because women have the right to abortion. Let me tell you what it really is. Let me tell you who is responsible for that, right? That's what we need to do.
Well, that comes to my next point. I mean, here in Harris County, we've been having days of action where we're out there in the community as Democrats, and that makes a difference because we're not just showing up election day. There's also a protest. There's a massive one set June 14th that we're co-sponsoring to get out there in the streets.
Yep.
And before I do this, well, actually, let's go ahead with your question, sir.
About the direct care professional getting paid $10.40, and I appreciate what the House did. They recommended $17.
Yeah, we give. Yeah.
Right. Across the board.
The Senate stripped it out.
Yep. Wanted 12. So they went to the middle of the road, which is 13. You can work at the Dairy Queen for $15.
Yeah.
Right.
You can water plants at Garden Center for $12.
Right.
The majority of the direct care professionals are women. 88%. They do the cleaning. They do the training. They do the heavy lifting. I don't know how many people have lifted dead weight, whether it's a child in elementary school or an adult like you, and put them on a changing table, which we do not have in our community. What do you call it? Outsiders. They want us to go out in the community.
Yeah, right. Help.
And there's no changing table. And guess where the number one location for no changing table?
Yeah.
The doctor's office.
Right.
Let me
jump on the. Let's make sure we have the question.
That's during the convention. The past 4 conventions that I've been to, none of them talked about it on the convention.
Well, let me tell you.
And they did it in the platform, but they all gathered.
This is something we've discussed a lot in
Go ahead,
appropriation.
yeah.
So the question is more directed about that home health care support had not gotten a wage increase in a long time. We did put them a small wage increase last time. They went from like $9 to I think 11.
And by the way, these are the people that come into your home,
right,
or your mother's home, or your aunt's home, or your cousin's home to help them take care of themselves.
Keeping people who have medical needs, people who are disabled, people who are handicapped in their homes instead of having to go to a group home or to a hospital, which is immensely more expensive, right? So in order to cut costs, we say, like, hey, we have a home caregiver. And a lot of times these home caregivers are also aunts and uncles who are working part-time doing that at home, and the government will pay them money to do that.
Because it makes a lot of sense for the family. It makes a lot of sense for the state. It makes a lot of sense for all of us.
People have better responses because they get to stay home instead of being in the hospital setting, and it's just cheaper overall. But over the years, we've slowly diminished or just not kept up with inflation, what we pay these workers. And after a while, like these workers, even if they're like, hey, I want to take care of my relative, but like I can make $10 more working outside, I have to work outside. I don't have a choice about it now, right? And so we have had this discussion endlessly. Like And the problem is, one, this is a huge group of huge population, it's a huge budget item. So increasing like $1 is increasing it by almost 2 billion in the actual accounting. And so they've been very slow to raise this amount. And over time, it's make the problem worse and worse and worse. And so even more people are leaving the system now. And yes, we do not pay enough attention to this because it's one of like 1,000 different places where things are awful, right? But it is something that's we very much need to have a real discussion about it. That's like, look, if you're going to have the system where people get care at home, then the people who are paid to care for them, that needs to be consistent, right? All of our things need, like we had this big fight about judicial pay raises at the end of the session, right? And the judges haven't gotten pay raise in quite a while, and basically because of inflation, nobody wants to be a judge anymore. And I understand, like, boohoo, but it's a real problem because the good lawyers that you want to become judges say, like, I would have to cut my salary in half to become a judge, and why would I do that? And so, you know, we lose a lot of good people who should have been on the bench for a long time. But look, consistently, again and again, the issues are the investments that we need to make to have a happy and well-functioning society. Those investments are not being made. Those investments are not being made in order to reduce the tax burden. The tax burden is being reduced to help, not you,
Billionaires.
to help billionaires.
Well, they can find money for subsidizing Elon Musk's factory up in Austin, but for whatever reason, folks taking care of people in their home they can't find. That seems pretty clean.
Yeah.
John, do we have any questions online? I want to get yours. Questions online?
No, that's
Okay.
good. He's had his hand up for a long time.
No, I know. Please go ahead.
21 hours by the state, and I struggle with even in getting provider hours, getting a provider to stay even with me, or if they do, they don't stay long because of the low wages, especially when they can go work as HISD for a crossing guard for 18.
Yep.
But I was going to raise my hand and say, what happened to mental health funding? It's awful for mental health services here in New York County. We're trying to get a therapist that works with special needs, psychoanalysis assistant, in the fourth largest city in the US. And like, what happened, and also what happened in funding properly 988?
So two ones, funding 988 and funding for mental health. Go ahead. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
So mental health funding is one of those places where it's just all talk. Even with the massive investments that people are making into the mental health system, Texas is still one of the worst funded systems in the entire nation. Yeah, and it hurts a lot of people.
Well, it hurts a lot of families and it hurts a lot of people.
And here's the thing we don't talk about. Like my day job is I deal with kids in CPS, and I deal with kids in mental health and in the juvenile justice system, but also occasionally deal with adults. The jail system, the criminal justice system, is essentially our mental health system. And I know we talk about it in terms of just people who are kept in jail, but a lot of it is also people who get arrested. Like a lot of times people are getting arrested because they have a mental health issue, right? And we don't talk about that. We don't think hey, the reason there was an assault, the reason that thing happened, the reason that because you have people who had undiagnosed problems, or people with diagnosed problems who just don't have the ability to get the help, or the help wasn't there, or the help wasn't easily accessible, so they decompensated, and then we have to deal with it as a criminal matter, right? And we don't talk about that enough, that there is a cost to this.
Well, there's a real good example here in Harris County. Last month, there was a sheriff's deputy and a constable rather who was shot because a fellow who'd been taken in basically for mental health issues was released with no training, showed up with a gun, and they had to defend themselves. And that was someone who really needed mental health care. Do you remember that?
No,
that happened right here in this county, and a law enforcement officer who'd been 30 plus years with the sheriff's, a number of years with the constable, was wounded dealing with that person who should have been in mental health care.
And I don't want to go this is like really deep into the weeds, but there's so much in my dealing with kids. So many of the kids that I've represented on very serious criminal matters, they didn't start at capital murder, right? They started at getting in trouble at school. And instead of helping them, instead of figuring out, hey, what's causing this decline that's happening at school? You were a good kid, you had good grades, and now it's going down. What's going on? Changes at home, changes in their own lives. And instead of, like, I had a kid who was like honor roll, played 3 sports, did everything they were supposed to do, and there was a tragedy in their life. And the teachers could tell from that moment where the spiral started happening, and he spiraled out of control and ended up, getting charged with an aggravated assault. It ended up charged with a drive-by shooting, right? And a kid is going from, hey, he has real prospects to go to college and play on sports and get a scholarship, to like, we're looking about whether he's going to do 15 or 20, right? And we talked about it. Part of our argument in court is like, Judge, you can see from the moment he started spiraling, had we had resources there, had we had, like, I asked the family, what kind of counseling was provided for him after this tragedy, after his father figure in his life was murdered? After, what happened to him? Well, there was 2 free counseling sessions, and that's it.
So
That's it.
So Representative Liu, there's actually, I think that raises an issue that's kind of important for us, and that is, we have a judge who's elected, who's a Democrat in that position. That's a judge that has a lot of influence on what happens to that child.
Right.
What does that tell you about how important every single one of these top of the bottom?
Yeah, and
are?
that I can tell you that, from as someone who's practiced in juvenile for a long time, that makes such a huge difference. We went from judges who just did not give a crap what the circumstances were, to now judges who are actually willing to listen and saying, oh yes, there were some extenuating circumstances, we could have done better, there's failures by adults here, this behavior is obviously because of intellectual deficiency. When we have kids who have a 50 IQ, and I've represented a few kids that charge of serious crimes who have, they're intellectually disabled, right? Let's not treat them like they're adults. Let's not treat them like they're normal kids. Like, let's treat them as kids with a 51 or 52 IQ.
Well, that matters who the judge is, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. Right? And that's why it matters to have Democratic judges who are willing to listen to those things, who are willing to say, like, we will listen to evidence, we'll listen to science, and not just go, well, my gut says, right?
This ain't getting any better. So we have a question from Angela Martin Greer online. Besides, we have this big rainy day fund, and there was a saying about a criminal defense attorney here in town who, when people would come in and they say, I don't have any money, he'd say, have you been keeping any money to put aside? It's pouring.
Yeah.
So it's pouring right now. What is really seen besides property tax relief that has actually been done with that surplus in the legislature now? Where's it gone?
So you have to remember that this surplus existed for 2 reasons. One, because we got this infusion of cash from the federal government, right? During COVID, and that money got spent and then taxed, and that tax money went there. The second reason that the surplus showed up was really when that money came from the feds. A lot of the money also went to the state, and the money the state would have spent, so the state should have spent like $5 billion plus on running the prison system. But during COVID, they just didn't. They just spent the federal money and didn't spend the state money. So that state money got dumped in as
rainy day
funds. But it wasn't really a surplus. It's just money that we should have spent and didn't, right? So the new problem is once this federal money gets shut off, now you have to go spend that $5 billion again. And so you have to put it back in, so that all that money just very quickly disappears. And at the same time, we also dumped a crap ton of money into the border Kabuki theater, right? To put on the show at the border. It was really expensive. And
you don't enjoy seeing the DPS troopers every mile down the border?
Yeah, no.
At Del Rio?
We had members go down there as soon as session started, and they go looked, and where there was this big pile up and under the bridge, that scene they had over there, it's all cleared out. This miraculously they died. Like 2 weeks after Trump is inaugurated, and sworn in, all of a sudden the migrant crisis is gone.
Well, and I'll give you an anecdote. If you want to get a hotel room in Del Rio, you have to have a friend because it's filled up with not just our DPS, but the Florida State Troopers, the North Carolina State Troopers. Everybody goes down for 90 days and takes up all the dang hotel rooms in Del Rio. Thank you. Now we have Representative Lauren Ashley Simmons, who I know has endured a lot. Thank you for being here. Not only has she done an amazing job as Representative 146, but she's also received the caucus's Freshman of the Year. So tell us how it's been, Representative.
Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm sorry I'm late.
It was a mess out there. We know it. Yeah.
Getting here. So I'm still catching my breath and kind of taking a moment to take it all in. I think all things considered, I will say personally, my session was fine. I think, some of us made out okay, but I have never been more committed to winning some damn elections.
Good.
I was obviously, I've done advocacy work. I've spent time in the Capitol, but it's just something about when you're in that building, you're having to make those decisions.
You might want to put it up close.
So when you're in that building, you have to make those decisions and do the wheeling and dealing and the negotiation just to get very, very, very small victories. That's just not a place I want to spend the rest of my career in, however long I decide to be a legislator. And so my challenge to all of y'all is to help us figure out where are 14, and I'm gonna say 15 for a little cushion, 15 seats that we can think about reasonably winning in the next few years, decade or so we can do some of the things that we would like to do. I tell a lot of people, what you see and what you hear is very different from the work that a lot of us are trying to do. Gene had, the weight of the world on his shoulders, trying to lead not just a minority caucus, because we're very much in the minority, but, in opposition in any way that we can. And there's a balance to that, right? We have to be able to fight really hard on some things and then figure out where do we get those small victories. But I would challenge all of y'all, if y'all have not done so, at least for the 24 of us in the Harris County delegation, go look at the bills that we filed this session, right? Go look and see what our priorities are that just never saw the light of day. I can give an example. I got one bill, on the governor's desk right now, my sickle cell registry, but I filed over 100 bills. A lot of them were tenant rights bills. A lot of them were things that were just for everyday working people. I had a bill die on the floor. It was for a study for homelessness for students. We wanted to figure out how can we house college students over the summer and make sure that they had access to food. And, we could not get a majority vote on that. And so as much as, we get tagged for rightfully taking care of vulnerable people, not letting them hurt trans kids, not letting them continuously go after diversity, equity, inclusion programs, we don't get to actually focus on things that are life-changing, things that would be good for our people. And so if you haven't done so, figure out who your state rep is. Hopefully they're a Democrat, and just take the time to see what your representative was trying to get done during this really short 140-day marathon. And I will say, my other thing that, you understand that we're a large state, eighth largest economy in the world, but it is so wild to me that we conduct business on a biennium every 2 years for 140 days. And it's shorter than that because it takes forever to get committee assignments. And so you think about how much work that we have to do. We spend so much more time in our districts working with our communities. And so I really want us to figure out how do we win so we can change the narrative, so we can be in power and be in control, because our people are suffering and they can't wait every 2 years for us to get these really small, and they are significant, I won't say really small, really important victories, when we should be doing things like raising minimum wage, like expanding healthcare access, and just ensuring that our people have good quality of life.
Representative Simmons, thank you for that. By the way, you hit two of the top priorities of HCDP was minimum wage, healthcare price. Tell us a little bit about the challenge or disappointment of even getting a hearing on something so important like that.
I think I don't want to have a defeatist attitude. I'm very much still an organizer in a lot of ways. And to be an organizer, there's a lot of delusion that goes into that. Like, I have to wake up every day and believe that, my words and my passion and my heart are going to convince people to do the right thing. And it's very difficult when, you're talking to a colleague from the other side of the aisle who says, I really like that bill, I really like that idea, but I can't vote yes on it because, I'll get a low score. I won't be seen as the most conservative in the body. And it's one thing for somebody to kind of have their beliefs. You know, we all come from different walks of life, and you know, they grew up the way they grew up. They live in the community they live in. Of course, I always tell people, you know, vote your conscience, vote your base. But to tell me that I can't, you know, even think about a bill that would, you know, a tax credit for a grocery store bill, right? Or expanding Medicaid, or, you know, doing a study on maternal mortality because I won't be seen as conservative enough. It's really hard for me to reconcile with, because my thing is, I'm like, look, this bill is not just gonna be good for the people in House District 146. I come and I represent that district, but this is something that's good for all Texans. And even with the one bill that I worked really hard and I put my priority into, the reason that I made that bill, the sickle cell registry, my priority is because I knew that it could clear the House and the Senate. It was vetoed last session. And so this time around, it got a lower number. It's considered a speaker's priority bill. And so, you know, we really put all of our eggs into that basket. But the very first bill that I filed was something that was very important to me. And that was ensuring that public employees were able to collectively bargain. I feel like that is the first step in bringing equity. Economic equity is when you can sit. I see my CWA union sibling back there. When you can sit as a worker and negotiate wages and benefits, and not just even those aspects, and talk about what it means for us to be safe on our jobs. What does it mean for us to be able to retire with dignity? And so to have that bill not even be heard in committee was, again, didn't think that I was going to be able to do something that we hadn't been able to do, you know, for years in one session. But just the idea of something that I considered a priority, something that would have been good for Texans. People don't understand about working in the public sector is a lot of times our state employees, county, municipal employees, they walk in knowing that I'm not going to make as much money as I could make in the private sector on the front end. But the trade-off is, we're going to make sure that you can retire well. And part of how that happens is being able to sit down with your employer and negotiate a contract. And so we have employees, public employees in this state who don't have that right. And so, you know, again, it's something that I plan to come back in 27, and I'm going to file that bill again, and we'll see where it goes. But I think for us up here, after we've kind of, you know, we've had our swords out since January 14th, coming home, we don't want to sound cynical. We don't want to sound defeated, but just understanding the reality of what we have to do, the dinners we have to sit at, and the conversations we have to have in the back room just to get those few priorities accomplished would be so much better if we could flip the narrative and be able to walk in. Like, I would love to walk into a session knowing that we're going to expand Medicaid. We're going to, you know, ensure that we have full day pre-K for kids. We're going to do something about our gun laws. I want to be able to walk in versus knowing, okay, realistically, like, this is my pie in the sky hope, and then this is what realistically we can get done. And again, I think to our credit, especially Harris County, we have the largest delegation. We punch way above our weight class. We do. For us to be as deep in the minority as we are, we couldn't even elect the speaker without Democrats. Like, it's 88 of them. And it's very, very, very telling that, you know, even with that majority, that the party in power can't govern. And they can't govern without us. And I'm glad they're at each other's throats. I'm glad that, you know, they can't get along. But I would love for us to be able to have that majority and to be able to control the narrative and push the state in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you. So the committee process, because I think a lot of folks don't realize how difficult it is. The best bill in the world, you can't even get a committee hearing. Tell us about that challenge.
There are a million ways for your bill to die. Like, so we were doing this.
Hang on a minute. We've had Representative Rue. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. It's been a great show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for all your hard work.
No, y'all give Gene another round of applause. What he had to do this session was extremely difficult. So,
you mean getting Democrats to all work together?
He had, like, it's like herding cats, just getting us all in the same room. You have to think, like, we represent Texas. My district is in between Representative Jolanda Jones, Representative Ann Johnson, and even us sharing borders, we have very different districts. So when you think about the Valley in South Texas, and you think about, you know, Democrats who are coming from across the state, we have different priorities and different issues. And I think the beauty of our caucus is that we are not always in lockstep in the same way that the Republican Party is. They rely on a website and a scorecard to tell them how to govern. And they will tell you that. And, you know, we sometimes disagree. Sometimes we're not always on the same page, but having that diversity of thought and ideas really is what I think our strength is. But kind of going back to the nuts and bolts. And so, yeah, there are 1,000,001 ways for your bill to die. So a bill getting to the governor's desk is no easy feat. Even in the last process, what we did, and basically it's just concurrence. So like my sickle cell bill, when it went to the Senate, it got an amendment attached to it that we, you know, were told will make it impossible, and I don't want to jinx myself, but it would make it a lot easier for it to become law. And so when that bill came back, I had to concur with those amendments. And so the funny thing that happens is everybody loves when a person says, I'm not going to concur with the Senate, because, you know, there's this rivalry between the House and the Senate. But within that process, I thought it was just largely a formality. Either you concur or you don't concur. Well, people were calling points of order on those bills during the concurrence process. And I was just like, wow. So can you imagine getting your bill all the way through a committee, voted out of calendars, on the calendar, voted on the floor, and then at the very last minute, right before we send it off, somebody says, oh, I raise a point of order. And if you don't know what a point of order is, the House runs on rules. The Senate is a little different. Point of orders happen over there, but not the same way that it happens in the House. And so somebody found some flaw. You didn't, you know, include everything in the title. There's something wrong with that bill that they found, and we go through that process, and you can literally kill a bill that way. So I have a lot of respect for our legislators, especially our Democratic legislators who haven't been there as long as some of our senior members, who've been able to get anything done, because at any given time, I had bills die pretty much every step of the way. I had some that never got a committee hearing. I had some that I didn't have any bills die in committee on a vote, but I had some that just never came up for a voting committee. So I was on public health and appropriations. So 2 of my bills that got to the floor came through public health. And I think because I was on the committee, I just got some grace, because people that voted no for those bills on the floor voted them out of committee, because that's what'll happen too. But yeah, just seeing how many, you know, of our good pieces of legislation actually die and don't even make it. And then we have a number of deadlines. And so we always have these deadlines. And so there's after a certain day, you can't do a second reading on a bill. And then you have to do a third reading on the bill. So we were like on the floor, and like people were like freaking out because their bill is on the calendar. It's supposed to come up. But once we hit that midnight mark, we have to just stop where we are. And so could you imagine, like, just in, you know, there were people crying like that night. So you might have seen Representative Joe Moody with his like clock on, and we try to kind of make light of it. But some of that is very, very traumatizing, that you work this hard to get your bill all the way to calendar for us to have a floor vote. And because of the time clock running out and working against you, and really outside of, you know, the opposition that we get from the Republicans, Father Time is really our biggest is really our biggest enemy in there, because it's a 140-day session, but it's much, much shorter than that, because it took us about a month to get committee assignments. And then even with that, it took so long. I didn't take I don't think I took my first actual floor vote on a bill until March, and we're done June 2nd. So that's just how that process works. And
You hope.
Huh?
You hope.
Yeah, you hope. No, because it was May 31st, and somebody was like, hey, I heard y'all were coming back for a special session. And I was like, who told you that? Like, I was promised. I was like the lady from Apple Care. I was like, no, I was promised by our chamber leader that we would not have any special sessions. But you know, we can give the governor everything he wants, and he still finds something to fuss about. So he got vouchers. And let me tell y'all really, really seriously about this. We passed bail reform. We did what we needed to do to protect citizens, but the bill that, you know, he's given us a lot of grief over was a bill that we didn't see till almost the end of May. And I'm just going to tell you, I was a no on that, because I'm not going to do anything that's going to further jeopardize and hurt our communities. But I absolutely understand that we need to keep people safe, and that we do need to reform our system. So please don't fall for the myth that we didn't do anything on bail reform. We absolutely did. We passed a few bills to address that issue, to make it harder for people who were committing violent crimes to get out on the street. But we also have to be very intentional that we're not keeping people in jail simply because they cannot afford to get out. There's a big difference between getting pulled over and arrested for a DUI or a joint, which in a DUI is a dangerous crime. But most of the time people are drunk and they hurt somebody. It's not malicious intent. There's a difference between somebody who goes and shoots up a school, who goes and, you know, and puts their hands on their significant other. Those are different crimes. And so we just want to make sure that we're doing what we can to keep people safe, while also acknowledging and addressing some of those very real issues when it comes to inequity in our criminal justice system.
So I had a chance when the HCDP was up meeting, and you mentioned, you know, you'd been an organizer, you'd been up in the legislature a lot of time, but boy, was it different on the other side of the table. What surprised you most?
I think the one thing that surprised me the most is honestly just how slow things start off, but then how quickly they seem to move. We vote on like hundreds of bills a day. So if we gavel in at 10, there are some days we'll gavel in at 10 a.m. We may take a break for me to go to us to go to our respective committees, and then we come back and we're on the floor till like 3 and 4. School voucher night was a 3 a.m. night. That was going to be a long fight, and it should have been, and we shouldn't have made it easy for them. They were trying to the other budget night. I'm on appropriations, and so I worked really hard on that. So I wanted to see that budget pass, but that was a very, very long night. And then you have to get up and do it all over again. So like Dr. Allen, she's on public ed, and that's the committee where a lot of stuff comes through. If you could be on public health and leave your committee hearing at like 2 or 3 a.m. and then have to turn around and come right back at like 7 or 8 a.m. for your other committee hearing. So it's just it's a hard process. It almost feels, one of my colleagues was like, this is kind of like torture. She was like, we're not sleeping, we're eating really bad, we're emotionally tormented, you know, because you'll have a bill that it'll be like, let's round up all the puppies and throw them in a pit. And then the next bill by the same rep will be, now let's hand out lollipops to all the children. And I'm like, I haven't even had the opportunity to catch my breath, because that's the other hard part. Every bad culture war bill that comes to the floor is going to pass on a party line vote almost every single time. And so what we always have to brace ourselves and our allies for is, hey, look, this is going to be a rough night. We're going to fight as much as we can. We're going to weed through this bill to see if there's any way that we can kill it. But we want you to understand that this is what's going to happen. And they're going to cheer and they're going to yell. And I tell people, look, go to my office, hang out. I have a full bar. I have plenty of snacks, because this is a very arduous process. And I think what happens to us, I used to think it was cynicism and I used to think it was apathy, but there's just a level of like focus you have to have, because as a legislator, I would never be able to get through a session if my heart is still broken from vouchers, right?
I apologize to interrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
Vouchers, that's not a culture war. That's a war on kids.
It's a war on kids. It's a war on the school system.
Tell us about that and what you see.
That was a bad night. And I in hindsight, I kind of realized pretty early that once Trump made that phone call, and I don't know if y'all have heard, he called the Republican like caucus, because there were some who, you know, there are a lot of those rural Republicans, the ones that came back, a lot of them lost primaries, but the ones that came back were pretty solid in not wanting to vote because they know it's going to hurt their school districts. Trump made that call and all bets were off. All of that went out of the window. And so I remember after we took that vote, you know, one of my Republican colleagues that I have a pretty good relationship with came up to me. He was like, Lauren, you know, I'm sorry. I don't want you to be disappointed in me. And I said, don't worry about how disappointed I am. You need to worry about how disappointed your district is going to be. Because if I'm your predecessor and I want to come back, I'm campaigning at home right now. And, you know, he tried to kind of give me this line, well, you know, it's going to be limited to this amount of kids. We're going to, you know, monitor it and put those guardrails in place. And I said, if you really believe that, you wouldn't be over here apologizing to me. And so I think for us politically, we have to be very vocal about what this means, not just for our system currently, but it's the brain drain that it's going to cause. It's going to be the learning loss. I mean, vouchers, we haven't seen them work anywhere. And what we stand to lose is so important, because you think about like what business, if you're a business owner, why would you want to come to Texas and move your family and your employees' families down here if they don't have access to a good quality public education? I used to make this joke when I worked for the teachers union. I was like, even if you don't have kids, you should care about what happens with public education, because you don't want to be around a bunch of dumb people. Like we want people, I mean, and I don't mean to be crass, but you think about so many of adults, even my age, I'm 37, are really like functionally illiterate. And we see that how it plays out politically when people can't discern fact from fiction, when people don't know what's real and what's false, when people, sometimes we treat all opinions as if they're equal and we're not able to have real conversation to say, hey, that just is not intellectually.
How about I add one? When they vote for Trump and not Harris.
Look, and some, and you know what, in some of that, cause so we'll get into these like little, fights on the floor, and I'm kind of feisty. I have a mouth on me. And so it'll be some bill. It was the 10 Commandments bill in classrooms. And I said, so, when Trump said, grab them by the, how did you explain that to your children? What was the conversation? And so I was like, oh, Lauren, I don't support everything he does. I said, so, and I was just reading quotes of just inappropriate things that he had said. I said, because I know you're really concerned about what library books are in the school, but that's your president. Like, that's who you voted for. And I won't say on the mic some of the other things that I said that get people really hot under the collar, but I always push back a little bit on that because, again, they try to make it seem like, we're just these boogeymen that want to hurt children, when what Democrats spend a lot of our time doing is protecting vulnerable communities, because we should. They're the ones who are obsessed with hurting trans kids. They're the ones who are obsessed with, censoring language and taking parental rights away, in my opinion. But we have to be the ones that are standing on the front line to ensure as much as we can that we push back on that kind of stuff.
So, Representative, thank you for that. We've taken questions. We may do one or two others before, because I know you've been here. But by the way, we've been joined by Amanda Edwards. Thank you. Thanks. And Mayor Joe Jaworski is here as well. Yes, former mayor. Thank you, Allison. And sir, are you elected as please? They said yes, sir. And your name? Benjamin Forrest. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Reading tribute shocked me. You guys did a great job blocking lots of horrible legislation. Why my Senator Devin Galveston Mays Middleton put up a bill to defund and eradicate Texas Dream Act, which you remember gives in-state tuition to undocumented college students who have improved their residence for at least 3 years. I think Rick Noriega, 2001, signed that bill. Well, anyway, if the effort to undo it failed, thank you guys for fighting. I just read in a tribute that Pam Bondi sued Texas today.
Yep.
And filed it in Reed O'Connor's court. And then I just read that Ken Paxton agreed to it. The consent agreement is unconstitutional.
So go ahead. So we'll repeat it just because we have a lot of folks online. Let me go ahead and repeat it. What you're saying is Texas got sued by the U.S. government, Pam Bondi, and just a couple hours ago, and our crooked, bad, cheating, whatever you want to call him, Attorney General Paxton agreed to it. And what was it they agreed to?
They agreed to that Texas Dream Act is unconstitutional.
Got it. So the Texas Dream Act, which protects folks who've been here since kids, is unconstitutional.
Allow them to have in-state tuition to college.
Right.
And Mays Middleton, who has announced for Attorney General, filed a bill which was defeated legislatively. So my question to Madam Representative is, how does that feel? Knowing that you did your job and then the inside game in the federal court just decided.
Okay, so the question is, we've got this little inside game between the Attorney General of Texas and the Attorney General of Trump overdoing what they fought and killed in the legislature out of Galveston. That's not gonna be our last question of the night, though, I'll tell you that. But go ahead, to see that, you're not cynical. You've told us that. You're not more cynical after the legislature. You're not giving up. What do you want to say?
So I think it's kind of what I talked about earlier, right? This is what it is when we're in the minority, that the people who have the power are going to always find a way. Greg Abbott didn't get his vouchers last session. So what did he do? He spent millions of dollars primarying members of his own party who voted with him 99.9% of the time, except for one vote. And he got what he wanted because he basically bought legislative seats. I did not see that one coming because I read that earlier. So then I said, this has to be one of these made up like AI stories. That's insane, right? And I think it just goes back to who gets hurt in political nonsense like that. We're talking about people who are doing everything right, who are wanting to be productive citizens in society. They're getting their education. And also, even if you can't, think about just the altruism of it, it's a benefit for our state to have as many talented and educated young people who want to live here. I mean, we're experiencing brain drain across the map, from education, public education, to medical, and not just women's reproductive health. Like, doctors in general are not wanting to come to practice because people are afraid of starting families here. But again, it's kind of to my point what I said earlier. I've never been more motivated. And I've always been a Democrat, but before I ran, I wasn't super dialed into the party politics. And I'm glad that I'm here now, and I appreciate all the work that so many of you have done. But we have to win some damn elections, and I'm so serious, because we
All
are
right.
always. Oh no, I'm serious. We are always going to be, on the defense. And I think that was the lesson that became very clear for me my very first act as a state representative, and that was having to make a decision in the speaker's race. And I was like, I have two equally bad choices, because we would say, oh, well, there's one. No, they're both conservative. It's just that one was more committed to maintaining the institution and the autonomy of the House, and the other was a pick from basically the state leadership. I said, y'all, and we did have a Democrat run, but in those situations, you have to be very, very careful. This is not like all of us going to vote. It's a small body. Too many of us vote I won't say for the wrong person, but too many of us vote for the person that we know can't win, then the person we absolutely don't want to win will. And of course, yeah, I got good committee assignments out of it, but I think about, as far as that decision in that process, that's not a decision I want to have to make for the rest of my career. I want to be able to pick from 3 Democrats. I wanted to be able to pick from 4 Democrats running for Speaker of the House, because that's how I know that the things that we care about are going to make it to the floor. I don't want a little pat on the head. I don't want, hey, well, we'll let you get this bill through because we got to let all this other bad stuff like those are not the devil deals I want to make, and those are not the negotiations I want to make. And because the legislature is the way it is, everything you do depends on somebody else. Like, I'm not a mayor, I'm not a county judge. I have to go in there and I have to make relationships. My sickle cell priority bill has a Republican joint author who I disagree vehemently with on a lot of stuff, on so many issues. And I had to really just say, you know what? He's a doctor, and, he's got a relationship with the lieutenant governor. Maybe my bill won't get thrown in the trash when it goes over there, when they see his name on it. But again, that's a tough call, because in the very same breath, you can read some of the bills that he filed and you're just like, my goodness, what are we doing here?
It's a good thing you're not dating him. I mean, at the end of the day, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for braving the weather. I know the folks online who've had questions appreciate it. Thank you for everything you're doing. And especially for focusing on the big, important job of next fall. That's what matters. Thank you very much. Thank you all for doing this.